Hey everyone, pro photographer Ian Plant here, your host of Photomasters. And in this interview, I am having a conversation with portrait and travel photographer Matt Jacob. I absolutely love his work. He is a visual storyteller, and there's lots to learn from our conversation. So if you want to learn more, then stay tuned. Hey Matt, welcome to Photomasters.
Hey Ian, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. Definitely. I think there's going to be lots to learn in this interview. Why don't we start off with the question that I ask everyone? Tell us about your origin story as a photographer. How'd you get into photography and what have you been up to?
Oh, what a long and boring story. Well, I was always a travel enthusiast. I from a kid, I would watch travel channels all day long if I could. And so the travel bug got me first, and that really took me down the path of becoming a pilot because I just wanted to travel, and being a pilot was the best way I thought I could travel for free. And then photography really came from traveling and seeing different cultures and just getting exposed to the rest of the world. And I wanted a way to save those memories and those moments for myself, but also share it with friends and family, and then eventually share it with as many people as I could that would see them in a way that would spark curiosity, and spark a little bit of education, maybe, or a little bit of awareness about other forms of life. And I'm by no means a well-versed scientist or philosopher or educator, but I felt like I could hopefully make a little bit of indent with sharing some photography and other cultures. So I really went down that path. It was initially a love of gadgets, a love of travel, a love of toys and pressing buttons. And really kind of the true photography came a lot later in terms of, I could actually do something with these buttons and with these pieces of hardware and pieces of software. And that's really where the expression and the true my voice and my style really, I guess, emanated. And when I really understood that I maybe I am a photographer now. Maybe this is something I can do, because I absolutely loved it. So yeah, it was really the travel bug that started everything, and continues to spark my intrigue.
Something you just said, I think is a perfect segue. I wanted to ask you about a quote on your website. And the quote reads, photography for me revolves around perception. It's about finding something in what could be seen as nothing. Not so much about what you see, but more about the way you see it. So could you talk a little bit about this quote and exactly you're getting at here?
I think photography is just a way for us to communicate. Now, whether that's communicating to ourselves, through ourselves, or to someone else, that's entirely up to the individual. But for me, the camera and the lens was always a conduit to get to the person. I'm mostly a portrait photographer, person or place um, that I was interested in. And so my interest is not what everyone else's interest is. And that's just perception, right? That's how I perceive the world and how my perception is interpreted into curiosity and my own interests, what I enjoy doing, what I'm interested in. And so my goal is not necessarily to convince other people to be interested in the same things. I understand that everyone has their own outlook on life. Everyone has their own perceptions of how they feel the world is, and that is a fact. That's not necessarily an opinion. So I've always felt the camera has been a way to express my perception, but also spark the curiosity in other people's perceptions. And when it comes to the mundane, and maybe mundane is a strong word, but I really love taking photographs of people because they're so layered. They're so complex. Human beings are so complex, and I want to be able to spark that interest and that perception in through them and through what they have to offer and who they are into the eyes and the brains of the viewers. And I think really that's all photography is. It's a mode of self-expression, but when you're also photographing people, it's a mode of expression that is able to enhance someone else's perception of the world, I hope, if done well. And so, it all boils down to that for me. It all boils down to, how do you see the world? And there's no right or wrong in that. That we can talk about the technical aspects of photography, whether some things are right or wrong. But when it comes to your voice, i.e., what you're putting out there and why, what is your message? What would you like to show? And it doesn't have to be esoteric. It doesn't have to be deep. It's just what you believe in and what you want to show as a photographer with the tools that you have, because that's all the camera lens is. It's not beat around the bush. It's just a portal to your brain and your perception of how you see the world. So I think once I learned that, it was a really kind of liberating moment for me, and it allowed me to free up a lot more and do the things that I really, really believed in, and hopefully um, showcase people and places that deserve to be showcased.
Let's talk about some of the specific images. And this one is one of the first images that one would see visiting your website. And I think it's a lovely image. And there's a lot of really great things going on in this photo. But what immediately attracted me was the strong sense of visual design. I just love the pattern formed by the two people on the floating log, and then the island in the background. So kind of one, two, three visual elements in this diagonal arrangement that really draws the eye in. And of course, there's a lot other things that are going on in this photo. But why don't you tell us a little bit about this photo and what you were thinking about creatively when you made this image?
I think about layers all the time. We remember that photography is two-dimensional, and we see something, right? And this is the biggest frustration in the gap between maybe beginner photographers and more advanced is you don't understand why what you see doesn't translate into the digital or analog image. It's, well, why doesn't this work? And most of the reason is because we view the world in the three-dimensional way, but the camera only captures two dimensions. So my compositional trait, I guess, that I try and imbue through all my images is just layers, or try and layer something. And most of my images are staged with direction of the people in some form or another. These are real people. These are real Bajau tribe people in South Sulawesi in Indonesia. They're known colloquially as sea gypsies, right? So I wanted to get shots in the water. I got a lot of shots in the water. They live on the water. They live in and on the water, have done for thousands of years. And the women here sparked my interest because they're almost the forgotten side of it. That it's the men that go and hunt the fish, it's the men that build the boats, but it's the women that gather these logs in, and they're the ones that build the boats, and they obviously do everything else. And so when I was here, this log had been tied down, and it was kind of swaying with the tide. It was very calm sea, so it was kind of easy to. And these women were out getting morning water, washing, and just general sunrise stuff. And so I knew that, like, as soon as I saw the log, so there's a leading line right there. It's a long log, and if I could get them sat here, and it's just pieces come together, right? This was not planned. The way they're sat and the way they're looking at the camera is staged, but the rest of it is just the way it was. And so, I was very fortunate with these locations. They should present just beauty, and it's my job to hopefully try and layer that beauty in an image with the people that I'm shooting.
Yeah, I mean, it gives the photo some real depth, and that um, you know draws the viewer in, but also just enhances the overall visual interest. I tell people that if you can get the viewer's eye moving into multiple
Mm.
parts of the image, then that composition is going to be more successful. It's going to engage their interest over the long term. And so that, to me, this photo very successfully does that. But that, that's just the sort of the dry analysis of the composition. There's also a real story being told here. And it's interesting that you say that this was staged, because it does look very natural to me. Like I just sort of imagine that this is a very authentic and organic pose that these people might strike during their daily lives.
Well, it's yeah, I get a lot of stick for staging photos, and it technically it's staged as far as the direction that they're looking at and the way they're sitting, right? Everything else is real and natural, and they were
Mm,
already there. They were already in the water, so they're already, wet, and they're already doing their
right.
thing. And it just took 10 minutes for me to, and I know that, by the way, that the story prefacing this is I'd spent a week with them already. Like, I know these people, had known these people, and I'm essentially just following them and trying to spot locations and moments that I can potentially take a photo of them. So it wasn't like I just rocked up in their place, go, "Hey, come and sit on the log, take a shot, and off we go." This was built up over a
Yeah.
week of essentially living with them, and so yeah, there is always in all of my shots, there is a balance. I'm not a journalistic photographer.
Mm,
I'm not a street photographer. And I don't pretend to be. I want there to be as much of a fine art aesthetic to it as possible. And really, the main way I can do that, that's in my control, especially with people who are just not, you've never had their photo taken before often, or just not used to it. They're not models. They don't pose. They don't know what they're doing. 90% of my challenge is getting these original, authentic people in their location, in their environment, to pose in a way that I think is pleasing to the eye and that means something a little bit deeper. So, obviously this wasn't the only shot I took of them, and we failed sometimes, and there are other times where it felt it was good. So, that staging, I guess, is the probably the wrong word. Posed,
yeah.
yep. This is posed, but the skill in directing is getting a subject, a sitter or model, or the person in front of your camera to pose without it looking like it's being posed, right? So
Yeah.
that's really just comes with practice and people skills and just learning by failing and all of the rest of it.
Well, yeah, as I said earlier, it feels very authentic and organic, and I think it's very successful. And here's another photo of yours that really struck me that I wanted to talk about. And what I was really interested in here, and of course, tell us a little bit about the backstory of this photo, but the lighting really stood out to me. I love the fact that you're shooting into the light, and what I was curious about was whether you were using any sort of supplemental light, whether you were using flash or a reflector to bounce light back onto the subject.
Yes, I would say 50% of my shots are used with a flash, a strobe, that with as soft a light as possible and with as subtle pop as possible. Usually, depending on the time of day, but usually I basically use it as a fill light rather than a key light, just to pop some light back to the area that's I want the viewer's attention to be. So that can be on the subject themselves, or it could be in the background, or it could be any other element in the image. And this is actually quite an old photo of mine. I nowadays I'd use a little bit less of that artificial light.
Yeah.
It'd still be in the same position. It'd still be flashing, but I'd probably have it on a lower setting and allow the rest of the elements to be exposed naturally. But yeah, this is one of my favorite photos because the experience and the story behind it. This lady is deaf. She's been working in the rice fields in Bali all her life. Um, she was just a wonderful, wonderful human, and the fact that I could capture her in her work environment, essentially in her office, with her other fellow workers on such a beautiful day was a real privilege of mine. But yeah, so the lighting, I backlight a lot with the sun. I love shooting into the sun. I love the glow or even rays. I love shooting sun rays, and just there's something about it. This ethereal feeling it gives me, the warmth. And as such, if I'm shooting people, I've got to light them in front of me somehow. So I think that's what kind of makes me in my photography a little bit more unique than a traditional portrait photographer. I like to bounce light around. I like to use supplemental lighting, and it gives me so much more freedom, especially if I'm on location. I could be thousands of miles away from home, but if I've got a light, I know I can shoot anywhere, anything, at any time, right? So it gives me that comfort that I can play around with. A lot of my photos people won't know are artificially lit, and a lot people won't know are naturally lit. So my challenge is to make them all as cohesive as possible. But yeah, this artificial light's just popped off 45 degrees just outside the frame to get as soft a
Mhm.
light as possible in her face. And yeah, that's it. Pretty simple.
Yeah, and I think the effect is very natural, and I like how you let the highlights in the sky, go basically white. There's still a lot of
Yeah,
warmth
blown
in the
out.
image, but, there's just a nice high key look to it as a result. And of course, talking about the layers again, you chose this low perspective, bringing in some of the grass into the foreground space here. And that just helps create that feeling of depth. I'm often telling people that if you want to have more interesting photos, if you want to create more depth, you want to put something in between you and your subject. And so I really appreciate that you have uh, the ability to see that creatively and to bring it into your photos. And here's
Thank
here's
you.
another photo of yours that I absolutely love. I find this to be very dynamic, and once again, we can see that shooting into the light technique. I like how you let the sky just have that really bright, almost overexposed exposure, and I also like that you tilted the horizon. I tell people that vertical and horizontal lines are not as exciting as diagonal lines, and I think having that diagonal horizon, just a hint of diagonal, really makes this more dynamic. And I'm jealous because you can do that. As a landscape photographer, if my horizon's out of
Mhm.
whack, I get no end of grief for it. But you can use that creatively. And
But it
tell us a
depends
little bit
on
about this photo.
it depends entirely on the subject, doesn't it? I mean, I the some of these I would skew. I might have taken straight in camera, and then I'm editing. I'm looking at it going, well, this is the guy's walking. This was shot diagonally in camera, but excuse me, the guy's walking through water. There's waves. It's a dynamic scene. So having a straight horizon just wouldn't have felt as dynamic, right? And it's
Mm.
exactly what you said. And so we've got to match the elements with the feeling or the emotion that we're trying to embody in the image. And so, yeah, this one was there's not much of a story about it. We south of Bali is heavily fished, and a lot of people, a lot of locals, and this is in Bali again. So a lot of locals go out early morning, catch their own fish with a net and their own boat. This guy was walking in the morning, and I this was a previous so the previous day I'd spotted this guy walking in, just a young man walking in with his morning catch, and I was like, oh, that would make a really cool photo, but at his level, right? I always try and get at as low as possible, especially in the sea, because it's difficult to get layers when you're in the sea unless you've got other elements in the background, which is more sea and sky, right? Unless you've got boats or anything like that, they might distract the image. So to get that layered look, I try and get a little bit lower so I can get some of that blurred sea in the foreground as well as background. And I love doing the sunburst, half of the sunburst, so just kind of shapes around their body or around their head. And again, this has artificial lighting coming off to his left hand side to my right hand side, because otherwise it'd be a silhouette, which is also cool. Like I love getting silhouettes like this, but I felt like the details were important with the fish nets and the fish that he's holding, and of course his expression that it just come out of the water essentially like Aquaman. So yeah, there's the not too much of a story behind it, but hopefully the visuals do it justice.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about this photo. Another amazing photos. I absolutely love this. And the one thing, I mean, I love the mood, the soft, cool pastels, just creates this amazing mood. But I also love the fact that you're not afraid to put your subject in the center. I think a lot of photographers are taught that the center is a no-fly zone, that centering your subject is bad, and it's unfortunate because in my opinion, the center is a very powerful part of a photograph and can be done successfully if you incorporate elements that are off center that will give the image some energy that'll break up the symmetry. And of course, with this photo, you've got the boat off to the right, or I guess maybe it's two boats, one person on each boat. And I just love how you included that in this photo. And it's so far over to the right, it's almost on the image edge. But I think that's the perfect place to put it because it really just breaks up the symmetry and it just takes the eye away from the central figure. And the eye wants to go explore those boats, but the central figure is so powerful that inevitably the eye goes back and it creates this visual tug of war, which really I can't tear my eyes away. I just can't stop looking at this photo. So
Yes.
tell us a little bit about this photo and kind of explain maybe some of your creative choices, your artistic philosophies that go into making a photo like this.
Yeah, so quick mention about those boats. I toyed and with myself about whether to include the boat because I have other shots without the boats in, but I felt that the real um, the subject was more important, and the boats had to be as long as they weren't distracting, but they were an element or a layered element in the photo that could draw the viewer's eye, but as long as it didn't distract the viewer's eye from the main subject. So, like, I'm not 100% happy with this photo. I love it, and I love having spent the time with this sadhu in Varanasi. So this was the Ganges River, the most holy river in the world, and not the cleanest. So I was a bit reticent, and I'm in the river up to my shoulders here, right, with him. Um, so it was a very, very special experience, and often at this time and in this place, you can't get away from having boats coming going by. So, it was a challenge in itself. Um, and he this is a daily practice, they meditate all day. They bathe themselves in the Ganges. So it was a no-brainer. It just wasn't difficult to this was a shot that people have got before, right? They've got their own take on these types of shots. So it wasn't necessarily an original creative process that went into getting this, but it was my take on it. And this was a man that we had spent a few days with, and so we'd warmed him up to it. And I say warmed him up to it because he was freezing at this point. He'd spent 20 minutes in the river with me trying to get the right light and right shot and right pose, and at the end it was just relax. Let's see what happens. Just meditate for me, try and get through this. And he was great in the end. If I hadn't had the few days with him before, he probably wouldn't have done it. So yeah, I absolutely love this shot. I think I could have done it better, but at the time I think that the person, he really is the star of the show here. I don't love the colors the guy's wearing on the boat. I think I tried to change these in post, I believe, just to be less vibrant, but I could only do so much. And that was why I was always kind of torn between keeping these boats in. And, to answer your question about the keeping subjects in the center, I mean, screw that. Like, whatever feels right for you, there's no rules in photography. People like to gatekeep the rules. People like to say what you should and shouldn't do. Try things, whatever's right for you, whatever you think works. Your audience will soon tell you what they think works or not. And a lot of this is why I try and get layers into my photos because I like to have, as a portrait artist, I like to have the person in my photos the star of the show. I like to have them as the main focal point, and often that's putting them in the center. But I get it. If they're just in the center with nothing else around, then yeah, I mean, you've got to have a nice close up or something to really get the details of their face and their expression. But I like to do these environmental photos, and so that's where the layers come in. And so if I'm going to put subjects in the middle, then I have to think a little bit more creatively about having layers. And that's really the reason I put the boats in there, just to add something that isn't, doesn't provide necessarily one true boring source of composition. But I like minimalism. I don't like to have too much stuff going on, especially if I'm shooting someone's face and front on. If I'm shooting front on, and I feel like their face and the experience of the moment deserves that. I want to shoot them front on, and I want them to be in the center, and I want people to look at them, and I want people to think about them, and I want people to study them. I don't need to be, worrying about, well, where am I going to put them, and what about this composition rule, and where does this go, and no, let's keep things simple. If you do the basics right, if you light it well, and you can get them to pose and be good at being relaxed, and let the person tell the story themselves. And I just don't buy into not putting things in the center. Again, it depends on what photograph you're taking. I think with portraiture, it can often work putting them in the center because the subject is a very big, complex, interesting subject, right? If you're shooting landscape, you've got a lot of other things going on, and so if you want the viewer's eye to be drawn to a specific place, you're probably not going to put that in the center. You're going to be playing with your different compositional techniques, and the same with street, especially with street or architecture, something like that. Yeah, that's where I would probably agree with the purists that don't want to put a subject in the center of the frame. But I think with portraiture, especially environmental portraiture, it works often more than not.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny that the thing that you were most unsure about with this photo is the thing that I think is absolutely brilliant. So
Oh, well, that's good. That's what I mean. Like, just don't listen to the rules too much. Your
yeah,
audience will soon tell you what works or not. And if you don't have an audience yet, your friends and family will tell you that. If friends and family aren't interested, go search for some people that are, or a mentor or something like that, or go and have a portfolio critique. And that's really
yeah,
where you get like, okay, this works. I don't really know why it works. I mean, compositional rules, if you look at that photo, they're breaking quite a few. But if it works for Ian Plant, then it's going to work for other people. It works for me. And that's that's all that matters. That is all that matters, right?
yeah. Well, I think that without the boats, I probably would have looked at this photo, liked it, but probably moved on quickly. But with the boats there,
Mhm.
as I said earlier, I just can't tear my eyes away, and that's a strong effect. So there's another quote on your website that I wanted to ask you about, where you say, "I seek to capture untold stories of unfamiliar life in the most beautiful, aesthetic, and meaningful way." So unpack this for us.
Okay, well, untold stories is what interests me. So, we see, especially in today's digitized, monetized, modernized world, we see a lot of the same stuff all the time, right? We see influencers, we see short form content, we see AI, we see misinformation, we see just a lot of just stuff, right? We don't. I've always said travel is the best educator, and I know it's a cliche, but I truly believe that it is, and that's where we really find perspective, not necessarily perception we were talking about before, but perspective on our own life and our own beliefs and our own values. And these are where we find untold stories that I think are important for us as a society to be aware of so that we become a little bit more empathetic. I think that really is the secret to having a bit more of a humane and cohesive society is to understand other people's lives, perceptions, beliefs, values, experiences, struggles, successes, and we can only really understand that by either living it or by being exposed to it, or just having glimpses of it. So I think untold stories, again, it's a bit of a cliche, but when you're thinking of quotes to put on the website, you have to kind of distill it down a bit. But I think they're of interest to me. I want to seek out more and more as time goes by because they're becoming rarer. We more people are traveling, more people are going to different places. Even the more indigenous cultures around the world, more remote cultures and indigenous cultures are getting westernized and modernized as they seek to better their own lives. So there are less and less untold stories, and that interests me even more. And it kind of goes with the unfamiliar life part. Is we're not familiar with a lot of the way people live lives. Our home countries are culpable of that. The US, where you're from, the UK, where I'm from. Um, we can be very insular. And that's through no one's fault. It's just the way our societies are constructed. In the US's case, it's you have a huge country with a huge population. When you think about going on holiday or you go to travel, you've got a million places in such a wonderful country to go to. You don't always need to go abroad, right? And so why would you? It's more expensive, it's longer flights, it's just more of an upheaval. And so I feel like with my privilege, I'm able to go to some of these places and experience unfamiliar life, and hopefully share it with the rest of the world. So um, the beauty and the aesthetics just comes because I want them to be. I never resonated really with the photojournalism side of things. I'm interested in anthropology, but I'm interested more in making something look as beautiful as I can in my eyes. So that always comes first for me, actually, because I know that if that comes first, the rest of it will follow. And I've got a lot of photos that don't necessarily look beautiful, but have those stories behind them, and I don't really show them because I feel like if I'm going to show something, I want it to capture the viewer immediately, and the only way I can do that is either show something that's happening that's either horrific or that's of crazy proportions that's going to capture someone's attention, or it's going to look beautiful. And I think making something beautiful, making something as fine art as possible is important to me. And with all of that, there has to be some purpose behind it. There has to be an intent for what I'm doing. And we talked about this earlier, and that's where the meaning comes into it. And it's a selfish pursuit. It's something that I find meaningful as experiencing these places and trying to use my skills to capture them in a 2D still image. But hopefully, if I do my job well and continue to evolve and continue to get better, hopefully I can spark the meaning in those images to other people.
So it seems to me that when you're doing kind of straight portraits, one of the challenge is that it's much more difficult, I think, to tell a story. And so, like, a lot of the photos of yours that we've reviewed so far have been more of these environmental portraits. But this is very much a standard portrait. But I think this photo tells a wonderful story. Absolutely love it. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about this photo and your strategies for making sort of that traditional portrait more interesting.
Yeah. 98 years old lady from the region of Banyuwangi in Java. And there are many, many tribes in Indonesia and Java, and actually in this province of Banyuwangi in Regency, there's lots of different ways that people live, and they call them tribes. They are tribes, I guess. They're more like villages that live a specific way and have different nuanced types of celebrating their religion or belief system or animist belief system, and many, many complex layers that I still haven't really. Just don't. There's only so much I can understand and remember. But so this lady had been living amongst her tribe for her whole life, 98 years old, and smoking 60 a day. For me, there's almost a simplicity in that story that she's still 98, she's still alive, and she's been smoking 60 a day for her whole life. And I just found that fascinating that someone of this ethnicity and this background who had belonged to this tribe for for generations, right? And she had lived there for so long. Um, it just came actually back to something very Western and very um, very relatable to us, and how the health of smoking, and then it got to more layers of the story of her face, the wrinkles in her face, and shooting old people is always both an easy and difficult thing to do, because they have less patience. They don't really know what to do with the camera. They were not brought up with cameras, even in the West, right? And so getting her to look at the camera is an ordeal. But if you can get a photo of their face, it tells a story in itself. You don't have to do much work to tell that story, because they've lived through so much. There's so much wisdom behind their eyes. So yeah, that was kind of the story of her. I sat with her for so long, and just chatted to her. I didn't speak English, but I have to have a translator there, and smoked with her, and just enjoyed her presence. I love old people. I could shoot old people all the time. They just offer so much with the stories that they have to tell, and the wisdom that they've had, and in this case, the amount of cigarettes they've smoked. So
Oh, it's a fantastic image. It really is. And this is another one that really caught my eye. There's definitely an interesting story behind this photo, and I'm dying to hear what it is.
yeah, so this is an Agori sadhu in India. They are sadhus. For those that don't know sadhus, what sadhus are, they're ascetic, religious. They're called holy men. Essentially, they're for the Hindu religion. They they devout their life to the god Shiva, and they renounce all Western civilization. Well, they all not Western civilization. They renounce all civilization essentially, and they just are nomadic. They own nothing. They are very, very spiritual. They meditate all day. They go on pilgrimages, and they just devote their life to worshiping this god Shiva. And the Agori is a is a part of the sadhu. There are different layers of sadhu, or different types of sadhus, I should say. And the Agori use human remains to, well, there are reports, and they're well known to eat dead humans, because at the Ganges River in Varanasi, a lot of devout Hindus go and bury their loved ones essentially. So they'll take a dead family member, they'll take them to the riverbank, cremate them, open cremation, and then pour the remains and the ashes into the river Ganges, and that's meant to complete the circle of life, and then they're allowed to then be reincarnated. The Agori take any remains or any human remains and either eat them or burn them, and then use the ash to do different types of um, spiritual prayers and ceremonies and stuff like that. And so they're known for carrying around human skulls for different rituals. And yeah, this was one of them, very senior Agori. And yeah, obviously, I had to get a photo of him holding some human skulls. It's kind of a little bit eerie. Um, very, very interesting man. And I wanted this photo to be as ethereal as possible, right? It's this very, very spiritual person, very, very spiritual place. I wanted a lot of negative space in the image to use, to provide a space for the viewer to think about, what is up there and what is out there. And I wanted to get a little bit lower perspective, because he's a very senior figure. I wanted that feeling of power, but not too much power. Power over the human body, power over the human spirit, power over himself. And I allowed him to do his thing, do some dancing, do some chanting, chant some mantras, and I was just shooting away. And this, I did have an artificial light, but I had it super low settings. Sun was rising up. I didn't really need it. I felt in camera I needed a little bit of spark just to pull out his details, especially on his beard and the profile side of his face. and just allowed him to really make the photo what it is. But yeah, this is one of my favorite photos.
Yeah, yeah. You know, you touched upon a few things that I was going to mention. The generous use of negative space, kind of almost that minimalism look that you were talking about earlier.
Yep.
And another common theme would be a soft color palette. You're not leaning into color saturation. You're going the opposite way. And it seems to me that with a lot of your photos, there's a beautiful mood that is created. And here you're using an atmospheric effect. So I'm guessing this is smoke, maybe coming off some fires or maybe some morning fog. But this photo just has a wonderful mood. And that mood really enhances the mystery. It enhances the storytelling process. So tell us a little bit about this one.
This mood is deliberately enhanced for the religion. So here in Bali, the Hindu religion, it's extremely spiritual. It's extremely ethereal. So most of my photos here in Bali, that I'm fascinated by this culture. There are endless layers and endless historic and authentic practices that I'm still learning, and will continue to learn probably for the rest of my time. And so when this location was actually near a friend of mine's, and I was doing a lot of recce's to find something that would showcase their morning offerings. So in the mornings here in Bali, well, actually multiple times a day, they give offerings to the gods. That can be anything from food, flowers, incense, rice, anything that they want to give thanks to the gods for. And here, it can be very, very beautiful and extravagant, or it can be very, very simple and as small as the palm of your hand. And this young lady would go to the same spot, does go to the same spot, to this shrine every morning, every day, actually, multiple times a day, to give her offerings. And this area of Bali is known to have beautiful mist after sunrise. So because it's quite jungly, it's very humid at certain locations and altitudes. As photographers, a lot of photographers here kind of know the areas that you'll get really good mist at about 7:30, 8 a.m., and you know that the sun will be strong enough to kind of penetrate that mist and give these light rays. And so, um, added to that, you have fires often, and the incense provides a bit of extra smoke as well. So, the elements were really giving me, a playground in terms of the light. And in post production, I made this as soft as possible. And you mentioned the colors. I really toyed with whether to make this a warm or cool color palette. And I went with a bit of both, actually. You see, the oranges, yellow and orange is a very popular color here in Bali because it signifies essentially gold, wealth, and uh, and success in terms of offerings to their gods. And so I always like to have some kind of analogous colors going on. And so I toyed with making that sun as warm as possible. It just didn't work. It didn't provide that mood, the kind of real atmospheric mood that I wanted to give this photo, because that's how I felt at the time. That's how I feel a lot of the time watching the locals here in Bali do their thing. So yeah, this was a conscious decision in post, really. The natural elements gave me, a beautiful setting and a beautiful kind of almost silhouette with the rays coming through. And then it was just a matter of, okay, look, what I want to get the feeling to be from the colors that I'm going to use in this image, and that's what I went with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's perfectly executed, both in camera and in post, and just creates this wonderful mood. Just creates this mystery, and that mystery is just so critical to getting the viewer's curiosity aroused, and that's when they start that process of storytelling. That's when they get emotionally involved in the photograph. And this is a good example of what you were just talking about, that complementary color scheme, that warm, cool effect. And I just love this photo. There's a really nice compositional flow with the road creating leading elements that draw the viewer to the background. But what really stands out is that opposite color effect, the cool blues with that just that little dash of yellow from the light on the bike here. And I think it's stunning. It's really visually arresting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this was a mistake in happening. Actually, it's honestly one of my favorite photos as well. We were if you I did release the BTS behind this image some time ago, but it was pouring down with rain. So we'd okay, I'll try and keep this as short as possible. I was in a project in Indonesia. I was doing a project in Indonesia um in the east of Java in Indonesia, a very volcanic area that um, many people go, called Mount Bromo.
Mhm.
Very high altitude, and when we were there, we basically got the timings wrong, but we were there for about 10 days. Every day, we didn't see the volcanoes because it was just pouring with rain, blowing a gale, freezing cold, and so we're stuck kind of going, well, we had some ideas with the horsemen around the volcanoes and just some landscape shots as well, and some people in the area that were very, very agricultural areas. So I wanted to get some shots with the people working in the agricultural lands around the volcano. Maybe one day I still will, because we didn't manage to do it. And it during the first 4 or 5 days of kind of just trying to get shots and thinking on the spot, okay, what else can we do here? We literally can't see much. I would just constantly see people on bikes carrying grass. I was like, where are they taking all this grass? What's going on? It's just all the time. And they're feeding their horses. The horses did a lot of work. A lot of horses in the area did a lot of work with agriculture, with tourism, and just helping people. It was a very mountainous area, and they didn't rely on cars as much as they did horses. And so I thought, that's funny. It's just an interesting little side story. And on one of our drives, we went up alongside the volcano, and just in cloud all the time. I just thought this would just make such a cool image. And I knew that the bike lights were I was watching it, right? These bike lights were penetrating the mist, and it just looked cool. And I just thought, well, let's try and set something up here. The roads were empty. We've got an artificial light off to the right hand side again at 45 Gs, just to get the details of her and her face out, because of the the light basically coming straight into the camera from the bike. And it was dark. It was just dark and cloudy, misty. And she was still working as hard as she could, ferrying around this grass. So yeah, it was just kind of set up for me. It was kind of an easy shot to take. But I think the colors, like you said, really, again, a conscious decision to really have that headlight penetrating both the layers and the mist, but also the complementary colors that are in the rest of the scene. So
So tell us about your podcast, the Mood Podcast. I've had the privilege recently of going on the Mood Podcast, but maybe you can tell my viewers a little bit about it in your own words.
yeah, the Mood Podcast is a podcast about visual arts, but the majority of the guests I have on are photographers, and it was a way for me to connect with other photographers initially. A couple of years ago, I just started like Instagram live conversations. Actually, I was back end of COVID. Um, Started really just I felt that the photography community was lacking, or at least what I could find was lacking, and the way for me to connect and learn from other photographers was just to reach out to them and try and talk to them. And that's really where it emanated from. And then when we moved to Bali a few years ago, I was able to afford to rent a studio, which is where I'm sat now. And part of the deal with myself was, look, if I'm gonna pay to rent a studio, I'm gonna make the most of it. And the best way of that I felt making the most of it was to continue with conversations with other photographers, whether it be online like you and I are doing now, or in person in the studio. And I've honestly loved every minute of it since. And we do post one a week, and probably split 50-50 between in-person studio episodes and online. And the online episodes take more of a photographer standpoint. All of my guests online are photographers, I find it easier to connect with photographers from the US and from Europe, and obviously I can't get them over here. A lot of the photographers in Bali, where I'm sat now, they're more on the content creation side, so I get that kind of different perspective of how they see the world going at the moment in terms of visual arts. And also, I interview some mm, coaches, I guess, or more mindset related professionals. I think that's a huge part of what we do as photographers and artists. I think if we're not able to, have a healthy internal process, healthy internal mind and mindset and outlook, then we're not going to create the best work that we can. So I kind of throw a few in along those lines through episodes, a few episodes along those lines in every now and then. But most of it is just me pursuing my self interest of learning from others and understanding. Again, this comes back to kind of my mantra, but just understanding other people's perceptions on photography, on life, on how they see the world, and how they express that perception through their artistry.
All right, I have one final question for you, Matt. What is the most important thing about your photography? The one thing that you try to do that makes your work different or stand out?
Well, technically, I think the use of artificial lighting and natural lighting, the combination of both, I think I always have that in my arsenal, and I think that that's one thing technically that helps me stand out a little bit from other people that do similar stuff. And figuratively and philosophically, I think empathy. I think I am constantly working on being more empathetic to myself, but everyone around me, and especially the people I work with and I'm taking photos of. And I think if I'm able to have empathy with all of those different parties that are involved in getting one photo, because it's not just about me, it's about the people I have to collaborate with, the guides, the fixers, obviously the people and the subjects that I take photos of. If I'm able to be empathetic with every step of that process and all of the people I'm involved with, I honestly believe I can get better art. I can produce better work, and that will always come across in the final images and the way I present them and the stories and the way I tell the stories. And I think for me, I'd want it the other way around as well. And this is it's how I kind of talk about perception. It's really down to empathy. If we can understand how people have different perceptions on life and art and compositional rules and technical stuff with photography, whatever it might be, everyone has a different perception of how it may feel and how it may look to them. And that will go to be more empathetic in all of our approaches and all of our understandings of what we want to do. So if I can do that, and I try to, I honestly believe that's the most important thing that I can offer and that I can do to be either unique or just to be the best version of my photographic self.
Well, that empathy definitely comes through in your photographs. I can tell that you're making a connection with your subjects, and that connection transfers to the viewer. So, you're making your subjects comfortable and you are doing your best to tell their story. And I think that definitely translates into an amazing visual experience for anyone who looks at your photos. Matt, this has been a fascinating conversation. Love your work, love everything that you're doing. And I think that there was lots to learn in the things that you talked about today. And so I know I'm going to be going back and listening to this conversation again. Thank you so much for coming on.
Appreciate it. Thanks for giving me the space.
Fantastic. Well, hope to talk to you again. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Cheers in. Bye.